Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult video number 314, Hypnosis, History and Usage. Now of course hypnosis is differentiated from mesmerism and fascination and incubation and roughly similar psycho-religious topics. So hypnosis is still used today. When it first though enters onto the medical scene, where we're talking over a century ago, people overused hypnosis, and they thought that it could cure basically anything. Like there are surgical reports from even as late as, I believe, the 1920s, talking about how hypnosis can replace the use of morphine and similar things in a surgical setting. This can potentially happen, but it's not recommended, and the problem is that not everyone will remain hypnotized once you're carving their leg off. Therefore, for every hit you had a miss. And of course that would be malpractice. The morphine works every time. Maybe it's bad for the body, maybe you give a little bit too much, they overdose and die, but when you're causing someone a massive amount of pain, you could have the same effect. For very topical things, hypnotism is still used. These days, hypnotism tends to be used mainly in a psychotherapeutic context. And again, not everyone is receptive to hypnotism. I realize there's a Scott Adams side of hypnotism where it can be construed as partially cultural. That's more on the propaganda and sociology side of it. Speaking in a medical context, mainly is what I'm doing. On that side, it's mostly within the realm of therapy, to get past trauma, to get past stress, etc. We don't generally hypnotize people before brain surgery or something like that. Now, hypnotism is sort of a similar takeoff to the concept of mesmerism, which in turn is sort of a takeoff of the concept of fascination, and also twain with incubation. Now let me explain the difference between these terms. Incubation in terms of disease curing. Of course, when we think of incubation, we think of incubating an egg, disease incubating in the body, a fetus incubating, etc. In the initial sense, ancient Greece, you're talking about going into a temple and incubating, culminating basically a god, dwelling there in order to solve a medical problem. I edited a work on this topic, I think many months ago, and the idea was you'd go into the healing temple, you'd be praying, meditating, you'd be in a trance-like state, and that during this state you could receive material from the, especially in dream form, you would receive inspiration and healing from the deity of the temple or deity that you're praying to, essentially. Fascination is something, it often involves the eyes. The idea is that staring directly at a person into their eyes, it causes a change in the mentality. Now this is easily explained. Of course, we are highly visual creatures, and definitely the gaze of eyes can make a person uncomfortable. It can lull them into a vaguely more receptive state. It can be a part to hypnotism. Fascination is a little bit different, of course. People used to talk about snakes sitting at the bottom of a tree hypnotizing the birds up above by staring up at the tree, and the birds would get all wonky and go into a daze and fly towards the snake, and then the snake would eat them. That's not 100% how it works. Of course, the snake is simply very patient, and eventually the bird doesn't realize the snake's there, flies around, and gets killed and eaten. But the gaze of eyes, especially in the term of fascination, to be fascinated, sort of lulled into a daze, is different. And then you have mesmerism. Mesmerism, again, is a little bit different from hypnotism, and it went off into the pseudoscientific. So the idea was that you could magnetically charge water or use magnets in association with the animal spirits. Mesmer, the father of mesmerism, of course, hence its name, would poke people with metal rods that were attached to magnetized or spirit-filled water. And the idea was that there was a force within the body, and it could be manipulated for various purposes. Essentially and effectively, mesmerism did work on some people, not just as a placebo, but in the psychotherapeutic context, in the same basic method as hypnotism. Could it cure a broken bone? No. Could it heal amputees? That's an old joke about religion too. No, it couldn't do these things. Could it purportedly cure or at least alleviate symptoms that were due to a psychosomatic condition? Yes, it's capable. So is hypnotism. Hypnotism is the more refined version without the floor show, essentially. Dangling the watch or the spinny wheels. That's more on the mesmerism angle, oddly, than the modern hypnosis angle for many intents and purposes. Now, hypnotism, I think, is a great thing. The problem is, again, its limitations, and of course it was initially seen as very spiritual. There are spiritualist works from over 100 years ago that talk about these things, hypnotism, etc., in a largely spiritual context. They boil them down to spiritual forces. Essentially, they are out-mesmering Mesmer with a vaguely differentiated sort of field, which is completely therapeutic and accepted in mainline psychology and psychiatry today, but they were ascribing it to the animal force, to God's interference, to demons, if they were against the practice. Sort of the similar way with the Ouija board. Of course, the Ouija board is basically a giant placebo game, because somebody with their hands on the little planchette nudges it slightly, and then it keeps moving. People get all wonked out about it, and then they subconsciously they start spelling things out. It's just the way that it works. Start misinterpreting things. But there are people who think that it's evil. There are people who think that the board is full of demons. There are also people who 100 years ago thought it was full of earth spirits that were sent by God to aid mankind. I'm not joking. I edited a very short work on the subject by a couple of Alaskan shut-in women. Apparently they were... This is true. They were shut in Alaska, I guess, and they had nothing else to do, so they played with the Ouija board, and they concluded that it was full of nature spirits, like gnomes. Oh boy, it was one of the weirder works. I can't remember the name of it. I can't even remember what header it went under. But hypnosis is essentially should be seen as two things. There's the reality side of hypnosis, which is that it can be good for healing diseases that are related to the psychology, especially stress-related. You can do other things to do the same thing, but hypnosis can be effective on some people. Then there's the pseudoscientific side that has to do with spirits, that it has to do, it's similar to mesmerism, fascination, all of these other topics. And in its initial form, once it differentiates from the floor show of Mesmer, hypnosis was overused. Initially, surgeons and doctors were testing it for literally everything. Oh, I wonder, can I hack this person's limbs off one by one and they won't scream? Well, it must be they're not feeling any pain. It works. Then they try it on patient 2. They start hacking off one arm and the patient goes completely apeshit and they wonder what they did wrong. That's because not everyone can be hypnotized in that same sense. That's about all. Peace out.